Wake of the Bellerophon by T.B. Dahl. Chapter 3. Summer Friends. By August, Newton Ferrers had turned gold at the edges. The wheat stood heavy in the fields. The hedgerows hummed with insects. The lanes smelled of dust, crushed leaves, warm dung, and blackberries not yet dark enough to steal without disappointment. In the valley below Greystone House, the pond lay in its hollow between the orchard and ridge farm, green at the edges, brown in the shallows, bright in the middle where the sky had fallen into it and chosen to remain. Thomas Oxenham was 6 years old, narrow and sun-browned, with skinned knees, quick hands, and the expression of a child who had been told not to do something and was still calculating whether the order contained gaps. He had finished his morning chores. This meant he had done half of them, argued about one, forgotten two, and completed the last with such sudden speed that Anne Oxenham suspected an ulterior motive. Mothers are generally unfair in this regard, being correct too often. Thomas slipped through the orchard before anyone could find him another useful task. He moved between the apple trees, ducked under a low branch, climbed the dry stone wall at the lower boundary, and dropped into the long grass beyond. Grasshoppers snapped away from his feet. A crow watched him from the ridge of the barn roof with the bleak judgment common to crows and elderly admirals. Near the pond, Thomas slowed. Someone was whistling. The tune was clear, high, and tuneless in the confident manner of boys who whistle for their own benefit and not for society's improvement. There was splashing, too. Thomas crouched behind a fringe of willow and looked through the leaves. At the pond's edge stood a boy about his own age, barefoot, brown-legged, and wearing a worn smock frock that had known mud intimately and survived. The boy held a stick in both hands and was poking at the shallows with serious purpose. Thomas had seen him before in church, sitting among the tenant farmers, usually with his hair flattened for the Sabbath, and his face arranged into the temporary innocence demanded by pews. The boy looked up suddenly. Their eyes met. The stranger did not startle. "Hello," the boy called. "You're the Oxenham boy, ain't you? From the big house up yonder?" Thomas stepped from the willows. "It is not so very big," Thomas said. The boy looked past him toward Greystone House, grey and square above the orchard, with its slate roof and chimney smoke and small windows, placed as if expecting trouble. The boy said, "Bigger than ours." Thomas accepted this correction. "I'm Thomas." "William Rowe." The boy pointed with his stick toward the ridge farm fields. "My farm's there." Thomas came closer and crouched beside him. In the muddy water, small silver fish flickered and snapped. "What are they?" "Sticklebacks," William said. "A whole school of them." Thomas watched the fish move. They darted as one body broke apart, joined again, turned in a single flash. "They move together," Thomas said, "like they share one mind." "Like soldiers?" William asked. Thomas shook his head. "Sailors." William considered this. "My father says a ship's crew must think as one in a storm," Thomas added. William nodded, though he had never been aboard anything larger than a cart, a pig trough, and the object Thomas noticed at that exact moment. A boat. It lay pulled among the rushes, half hidden under willow shadow. It was no more than 4 feet long, flat-bottomed, rough, and made from 2 planks, a transom, and faith. It had a short length of twine tied to a willow root. It looked ready either to float or to become firewood, depending on how sternly one questioned it. Thomas stood at once. "Is that yours?" William's chest lifted. "Aye, my made her. She floats true." Thomas walked to it and ran his hand along the rough gunwale. The wood had splinters, the seams were uneven. There was a tarred patch near the bow, where someone had repaired a leak without wasting time on beauty. Beauty, in small craft and poor households, often had to wait behind usefulness. Thomas said, "Have you named her?" William stared. "Named her? Every vessel needs a name. It's a puddle boat." "That makes no difference," Thomas said. "It is bad luck otherwise." William looked at the punt. The punt said nothing. Boats generally allow humans to make the first mistake. Victory, William said at last. Thomas grinned. Like Admiral Keppel's flagship. William brightened. Aye. She is a little small for a first-rate. William untied the twine. Aye, but she's mine. That settled the question. Ownership makes even a bad boat noble. William held out the ash pole. Want to go? Thomas had already placed one foot in the punt. Have you poled before? William asked. No. William looked doubtful. I have watched the men on the Yelm. This answer appeared to satisfy neither William nor physics, but Thomas stepped in anyway. The punt rocked. Thomas's arms lifted. For one breath he hovered between triumph and pond water. Then he found his balance. William whistled. You've got sea legs already. Thomas took the ash pole and pushed against the bottom. The punt slid away from the bank with a sucking sound. Water slapped against the planks. The willow branches trailed across Thomas's shoulder. His whole face changed. It was not joy exactly, because joy is too small a word and often too noisy. It was recognition. The world had moved beneath him, and he had not fallen. Something in his body understood the answer before his mind could give it a name. Thomas pushed again. The punt turned. Not a bad vessel, HMS Victory, Thomas called. William laughed from the bank. She'll do better with a captain aboard. I am aboard. She's my boat. Then you are the owner, Thomas said. That is different. William frowned. He had met gentlemen before, mostly at a distance. They ordered, paid, prayed, in front pews, and owned fields other people sweated in. This one was 6 years old, and had just invented a legal problem in a pond. Before William could answer, a man's voice came from the orchard path. Thomas? Thomas turned too quickly. The punt lurched. He stabbed the pole down and recovered with 1 foot in water over the bottom boards. James Oxenham appeared through the willow screen. He wore shirt sleeves rolled to the elbow, a plain tricorn against the sun, and the cautious expression of a father approaching water, a child, and a homemade vessel in the same glance. He stopped. He looked at Thomas. He looked at William. He looked at the punt. The silence was brief, but it had rigging in it. Thomas said quickly, This is William Rowe, father, from Ridge Farm. He has a boat. William ducked his head. Sir? James stepped closer and crouched beside the punt as Thomas poled back toward shore. Good day, William Rowe. Good day, sir. James set one hand on the gunwale and tested it. The wood creaked, but did not surrender. Solid enough, James said. Your father's work? William nodded. He knows wood, sir. That is apparent. William straightened a fraction. Praise from a gentleman did not feed chickens, but it had weight. James examined the punt's bottom, the seams, the patch, the pole. And you navigate her about the pond? Yes, sir, bank to bank. Sometimes round the reeds if the wind don't push me wrong. The wind is frequently discourteous, James said. William looked uncertainly at Thomas, then back at James. James asked, Do you swim? No, sir. Thomas looked surprised. Not at all. William shrugged. Pond's not deep enough proper, and Dar says there's work enough on land without splashing for sport. James's gaze moved to Thomas. Thomas has been asking to learn. Thomas stood very still in the punt. I have. So I recall, James said. There is a deeper pool in the creek at high tide. Sheltered enough? Perhaps you would both care to try this afternoon. Thomas's eyes widened. William shifted from foot to foot. My Dar won't mind if I'm back for evening milking, William said. He says a boy should know how to swim, case he falls in the drink. Sensible man, James said. Come up to the house when you are done with your sticklebacks. Mrs. Oxenham will find something for both of you to eat before we go. William stared. To the house? Thomas hopped from the punt into the mud. Yes, Thomas said, as though inviting farm boys into Greystone House was an ancient custom. We are to be friends now. William studied him. Then William grinned, revealing a missing front tooth. Reckon we are? James's eyes moved briefly between them. The son of a king's officer, the son of a tenant farmer. Bare feet, scuffed shoes, one rough punt, one shared pond. The world had strict opinions about such things. Fortunately, boys often fail to consult the world before arranging civilization anew. James walked back toward the orchard. When he had gone, William reached into the pocket of his smock and pulled out a small carved boat no longer than his palm. Thomas bent over it at once. It had a central mast, a scrap of cloth for a sail, a blunt bow, and no rudder. It was crooked in 3 directions, which gave it character. It doesn't sail proper, William said, just sits there mostly, but I thought someday I might make it go. Thomas took it with both hands. The seriousness of his face made William stand taller. We need to shape the sail better, Thomas said, and add a rudder. Father has books with drawings of rigs. William stared. You can read ship books. Some words. Ship words? Some ship words. William looked at him with frank admiration. Thomas turned the little boat over, inspecting the hull. The diagrams help. What's a diagram? A picture that pretends to be an explanation. William nodded, satisfied. That afternoon, James kept his promise. The tide was high when he brought the boys down to a sheltered cove on the Yelm, where rock, weed, and current had formed a natural pool against the shore. The water shone green over stone. The air smelled of salt, bladderwrack, mud, and sunlight on wet rock. Farther out, the estuary breathed against its banks, drawing small boats gently on their moorings. Anne had packed rough linen cloths, bread, cheese, and 2 apples. She had also packed instructions. James had heard them all. Do not let them go too far. Do not let them grow chilled. Do not let Thomas boast. Do not let William feel lesser. Do not return either child drowned. The last instruction had seemed obvious, but marriage teaches a man that obvious things may be repeated usefully before water. James stood waist deep in the pool with Thomas on one side and William on the other. The trick, James said, is not to fight the water. It wants to hold you up if you let it. William eyed the surface. It don't look like it wants anything. Water seldom advertises its intentions. Thomas pushed forward eagerly. James put a hand beneath his chest. Not so fast. Stretch out. Let your legs rise. Thomas did. His body floated awkwardly, then steadied. His toes kicked. Water splashed James in the face. James blinked. From the hips, Tom. Not as if you were murdering the sea. Thomas tried again. His strokes were wild at first, then less wild, then almost purposeful. He gulped water, coughed, shook his head, and went on. Within the hour, he could paddle 3 yards from James's hands to a rock shelf, turn, and come back with his hair plastered to his forehead and his eyes bright. William was slower. He gripped James's forearm hard enough to whiten his knuckles. James said, "Breathe when your mouth is clear. Kick steadily." "Do not snatch at the water," William sputtered. "It keeps getting in." "That is one of its customs." Thomas called from the rock shelf. "Come on, Will. It holds if you let it." William glared at him. Rivalry did what instruction could not. By the time the tide began to ebb, both boys could dog paddle across the pool. Thomas moved with more ease. William moved with more rage. Both methods achieved distance. On the shore, they wrapped themselves in linen cloths and sat with their knees drawn up, shivering in the sun. James handed each boy bread and cheese. "A sailor who cannot swim," James said, "is at the mercy of the sea rather than its partner." William chewed thoughtfully. "Sir?" "Yes?" "Might we bring my boat next time?" "Your punt?" James glanced toward the creek. "Not into the current. She is too small." Thomas said, "Not the punt. Will has a toy sailboat. We thought to try her in open water." James looked at his son. That look meant, "I see you have already begun a project without permission." Thomas looked back. That look meant naturally. James said, "Test improvements on the pond first." Open water is not a nursery. The following day the boys returned to the pond with William's toy boat, a spool of thread borrowed from Anne's work-basket, beeswax from Ridge Farm, and a small knife James had lent under such strict instructions that the knife seemed almost a clergyman. They sat in the grass near the reeds. The toy boat lay between them like a patient. "The sail is wrong," Thomas said. "It is cloth," William said. "That is not enough." William considered the little square of dirty fabric. "It catches wind." "It catches it badly. It needs shape." "Wind has shape?" "In a sail it does." Thomas pinched the scrap of cloth and carved his hand. "It must belly out. Like this?" William nodded slowly. He might not have read shipbooks, but he knew sacks, tarpaulins, and shirts on a line. Wind pushed where cloth allowed it. That made sense. Thomas cut and retied the sail. The knife flashed in the sun. William watched his fingers. "You use that tidy." "My father says a careless knife makes a quick surgeon necessary. My da says a careless knife means you bleed on your own boots." "Same thing," Thomas said. They fitted the sail. Then Thomas frowned at the stern. "She needs a rudder." William rummaged in his pocket and produced a thin curved sliver of wood. "Old beryl hoop." Thomas took it as though William had produced gold. "Perfect." He carved a notch in the stern and fitted the sliver into place. The work was not elegant. The rudder leaned. But it was a rudder, and much in this world begins by leaning. They set the boat on the pond. She listed at once. William groaned. "She's drunk." "She needs ballast," Thomas said. William gathered pebbles. They placed them one by one in the hull. Too many. She sank lower. Too few. She leaned again. At last the little craft sat level. A breeze crossed the pond, lightly wrinkling the surface. The sail filled. The toy boat moved. Not fast, not straight, but with intention. William shouted, "She sails!" Thomas crouched at the edge, eyes narrowed. "The sail must be bigger." William stared at him. "She just sailed. And a second one would help, like a cutter." William laughed. "You are never satisfied." Thomas watched the little boat creep toward the reeds. No. This was true. Over the following weeks, the toy boat became less toy and more argument. The boys altered her sail, moved her mast, changed her ballast, waxed her hull, smeared pine resin into her seams, added a bowsprit that broke twice, tried a second sail that made her capsize in a gust, and was therefore declared educational. William brought farmyard practicalities. Thomas brought diagrams half remembered from naval books. Together they discovered that wind could be bargained with, but not commanded. The pond became their ocean. The reeds became enemy coasts. The mudbank was a lee shore. A half-submerged branch became a reef, then a French squadron, then a monster, depending on the hour and the amount of bread in their stomachs. The punt Victory waited among the rushes. Inevitably, Thomas looked at her too long. One breezy afternoon, William caught him staring. "What?" Thomas said. "We could add a sail." William looked at the punt, then at Thomas. "She is not made for sailing." Any vessel can sail with the right rig. This was not true, but it had the rhythm of truth, and many naval decisions have begun with less. William scratched the back of his neck. She'd tip. Not if the mast is placed right. And the sail not too large. We need a mast that can be stepped and unstepped. William's face changed despite himself. A sail on Victory. A proper sail. A craft made by his father moving under canvas. No tenant boy of Ridge Farm had owned such a thing. That evening Thomas approached James in the parlour. James sat with estate accounts before him. The numbers were dull, stubborn, and less obedient than ships. Anne had left him to them with a sympathy that did not extend to doing them herself. Thomas stood beside the table. "Father, may I ask your advice on a matter of sailing?" James laid down his quill. This was how trouble dressed for church. "You may." Thomas explained the proposal. He spoke of mast placement, a small lug sail, a removable step, sheet control, the need to reef or strike the sail if the wind freshened, and the possibility of a tiller. James listened without smiling. That was kind of him. When Thomas finished, James leaned back. A punt not designed for sail may behave badly under canvas. Thomas nodded. That is why I ask you. The forces involved are not imaginary because the pond is small. No, father. A gust could capsize her. Yes. If she is over-canvassed, she may not answer the helm. Yes. If badly balanced, she may spin, broach, or lie helpless. Thomas's brows pulled together. Then we must balance her. James looked at his son for a long moment. The boy had not asked whether the thing was easy. He had asked how it might be done properly. That was dangerous. It was also the beginning of seamanship. James said, I will help. Thomas's whole body lifted. Truly? On conditions. She is used only on the pond, never alone, never in a high wind. No standing in her, no showing off, no going near the outlet, no quarrels aboard. Thomas nodded rapidly. James raised one finger. And if I say the sail comes down, it comes down at once. At once. Not after an experiment. Thomas hesitated. James waited. Thomas said, at once. The next afternoon, James arrived at the pond carrying a canvas sack. Inside were tools, cordage, a short length of spar, a small block, and a piece of old sailcloth from a sea chest in the attic. The sailcloth smelled faintly of salt and tar and distant weather. William touched it with 2 fingers. This was on a real ship. Spare cloth, James said. Old, but sound enough for a pond. William's face became solemn. A scrap from a real ship had entered his hands. There are sacraments less powerful to boys. James laid the cloth on the grass and weighed the corners with stones. The shape matters, James said. Too square, and she will be hard to handle in a gust. Too narrow, and she will not drive. Thomas knelt close. William knelt too, though farther back, as if not wishing to presume. James noticed. Come nearer, William. A sail does not care about your father's rent. William looked up, startled. Then he shuffled closer. James showed them how to mark the cloth, how to cut with the weave, how to reinforce corners, how to seize a line properly, how not to put a thumb where the knife intended to go. This, James said, tying 2 lines together, is a sheet bend. Thomas copied him quickly. William's first attempt collapsed into a knot that resembled a diseased spider. James undid it without comment. Again. William tried again. Better. This is a bowline, James continued. A fine knot, never forgets itself, never slips, never jams if properly made. Thomas's fingers moved. The loop formed. James nodded. William frowned at his own cordage. The rope refused to become a bowline. Rope is conservative. William muttered something about its parentage. James's mouth twitched. Slowly, James said, the rabbit comes out of the hole, round the tree, and back down the hole. William stared. What rabbit? Thomas said, there is no rabbit. It is just the rope. James said, there is always a rabbit if it helps the rope behave. William tried again. This time the knot held. His grin came slowly, as if he did not want to frighten it away. Over several afternoons, victory changed. James fashioned a removable mast, and a mast step secured to one of the thwarts. William helped his father plane a small tiller arm from scrapwood. Thomas adjusted the sheeting arrangement twice before James approved it. They added a tiny leeboard after the first trial showed what James had predicted and Thomas had secretly hoped to solve. A flat-bottomed punt without keel had little appetite for going to windward. It preferred sliding sideways in a philosophical manner. The water pushes her off, Thomas said, crouched beside the bank after watching the failed tack. Yes, James said. She has no grip below. River barges use leeboards. James looked at him. So they do, William said. "We can make one." "We can make two," Thomas said. "One to lower on either side." William's eyes lit. James said nothing. He merely handed William a pencil stub and let the boys draw in the mud. Finally came the first true trial. The afternoon was bright, the breeze steady, the pond ruffled but not rough. The willows whispered, dragonflies darted over the surface like enamelled needles. The punt lay at the edge with her new mast stepped, her small lug sail furled, her lee-board raised, and her tiller fitted. She looked absurdly grand. Small things often do when given canvas. James stood ankle-deep at the bank. "Well," he said, "who commands the maiden voyage?" The boys looked at each other. William said at once, "Thomas should. He knows best how she works." Thomas shook his head. "She is your boat, Will." William's lips pressed together. He wanted it. He also feared wanting it visibly. Thomas said, "You should steer first." James looked between them. "How about this? William takes the tiller, Thomas tends the sheet. Captain and sailing master, if you like. You will need each other." The compromise pleased both and offended neither, which made it a rare thing in naval history. William climbed in first and took the stern. Thomas settled amidships, one hand on the sheet, face intent. James held the punt steady. "Remember," James said, "if the wind freshens, ease the sheet. Better to lose way than capsize." Thomas nodded. William nodded harder. James pushed them off. For one dreadful moment, victory drifted. The sail hung limp. The punt turned broadside. William's grin flickered. Then the breeze found them. The canvas filled with a soft thump. The sheet tightened in Thomas's hand. The punt leaned, caught herself, and moved. William gasped. "She's answering." Thomas's jaw set. "Keep her off a little, not too much." William moved the tiller. Victory turned. Not smoothly, not nobly, but she turned. Across the pond she went, the little sail bellied, the lee-board biting, water chuckling along the flatboards. William laughed aloud. Thomas did not laugh. He was listening, the creak of the mast, the pull in the sheet, the slap of water, the shift of William's weight, the pressure of wind. It all spoke at once, and for the first time Thomas heard not noise, but meaning. On the bank, James watched his son's hands. Small corrections. Not panic, not guessing. Feel. That was the word James did not say. A boy could learn knots. A boy could learn tables. A boy could recite every point of sail and still be useless when canvas filled. But feel was different. Feel was the beginning of command, and command was a lonely education. The punt reached the far bank. William whooped. Thomas grinned then, sudden and bright. "Now tack." They tried. Victory refused. The bow came up, shuddered, lost way, and drifted backward in an undignified slide. William shoved the tiller the other way. Thomas hauled the sheet. The sail flapped. The punt turned in a circle. On shore, James folded his arms. The boys tried again. The punt refused again. The third attempt ended with Thomas saying, "We need a better lee-board." William said, "We need a better boat." Thomas looked offended. James called, "You need less haste." Victory bumped gently into reeds. Reeds are excellent critics. They say nothing and stop progress completely. Over the following weeks, the punt improved. The lee-board became larger, then smaller, then shaped, then pivoting. William proved unexpectedly skilled with practical contrivance. He understood wood because wood was everywhere in farm life. Handles, gates, carts, barrels, hurdles, pegs, tools, repairs made in haste before rain. He could see grain, weakness, bend and split, where Thomas saw only a piece of material waiting for instruction. Thomas improved the tiller linkage, then the sheet lead, then the balance of the sail. James intervened when enthusiasm approached drowning. This happened often enough to be educational. The boys learned to cross the pond, then to tack, then to wear, then to hold a course, then to recover from a gust, They learned that standing in a small boat was an invitation to baptism. They learned that a sheet wrapped around an ankle was a villain. They learned that a leeboard raised at the wrong time turned progress into drift. They learned that blame is less useful than bailing. Mock battles followed. William stood at the tiller with a stick for a glass. "I am the French fleet," he cried, "trying to escape." Thomas crouched by the sheet. "The wind is against you," Thomas answered. "We shall cut your line and take you ship by ship. You cannot take me if I run for Brest. That is what Frenchmen always think." William swung the tiller. Victory rounded poorly and lost way. Thomas groaned. "You have missed stays again." William shouted, "Then the French have won." "No," Thomas said. "The French have drifted into mud." The punt slid gently onto the bank. History, for once, supported Thomas. James observed these campaigns from the orchard side of the pond. Sometimes he corrected them. Sometimes he let them fail. Failure taught more efficiently than fathers, though fathers took it personally. One evening, after the boys had carried the sail up to Greystone House to dry, Thomas sat at the kitchen table sketching another modification by candlelight. His tongue rested at the corner of his mouth. His fingers were stained with pond mud and ink. A piece of bread lay untouched beside him, which was alarming in itself. Anne stood beside James in the doorway. "He has your sea fever," Anne said quietly. James leaned one shoulder against the frame. "Yes." "And Will?" James watched the two boys through the window. Outside, William was helping Grace coil a length of cordage properly. Grace corrected him with the authority of a woman who had learned knots by force of household necessity and disapproved of decorative tangles. "William has hands," James said. Anne looked at him. "Useful hands," James said. "He sees how things bear, how they strain. Tom sees the principle first. William sees the wood split before it does." Anne folded her arms. "That sounds like friendship." "It sounds like a crew." Anne's gaze returned to Thomas. "He will go far," she said. James was silent. The words had landed badly, though they were kindly meant. Far meant beyond the orchard, beyond the pond, beyond the Yelm. Far meant letters arriving late, if they arrived. Far meant lists in newspapers. Far meant fever ports, enemy shot, courts-martial, promotions given to fools, and graves with no church bells. Thomas bent over his sketch, utterly absorbed. James said, "Further than I did, perhaps." Anne touched his sleeve. James looked away before she could read too much in his face. Outside, the summer light lingered on the distant water. Autumn would come soon. Michaelmas lessons, Latin grammar. Heavier farm work for William, shorter days, rain, mud, books, chores. The pond would grow cold, the reeds brown, and Victory would be dragged under shelter to await another season. But for now, the boys had the afternoons. They had whined enough. They had a boat that answered when treated with respect and punished carelessness without malice. They had a friendship laid across class, land, water, and the solemn nonsense by which adults divide children before children have finished inventing themselves. On the last golden evening of August, Thomas and William sailed Victory from the willow bank to the far reeds, and back again without grounding, capsizing, quarrelling, or losing a single piece of equipment. This was, by naval standards, a triumph bordering on the supernatural. At the bank, William shipped the rudder and looked across at Thomas. "We did it." Thomas held the sheet loosely in one hand. The sail trembled above them. "Yes," Thomas said. He looked past William, over the pond, toward the lower fields and the lane that eventually bent away toward the village, the creek, the estuary, and the open water beyond. William followed his gaze. "What are you looking at?" Thomas did not answer at once. A breeze came over the reeds. Victory stirred beneath them. At last Thomas said, "I think the pond is too small." William looked around at their kingdom of mud, reeds, sticklebacks, dragonflies, and hard-won glory. Then he grinned. "Aye," William said, "but she was big enough to start." The sail gave a soft crack. The punt nudged the bank, and somewhere beyond the sheltered valley, beyond the creek and the roads and the fields of Newton Ferrers, the wider sea went on moving, as if it had heard them and was making room.
The story continues in the next chapter, so make sure to subscribe, leave a comment with your thoughts, and share this video with fellow book lovers.